pursuit of progress.
I'm Craig LeMoult. Tonight on Greater Boston, when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, they threw the security of other rights into question too. That prompted many same-sex couples to go through the process of legally adopting their own children to guarantee their parental rights. We'll dig into the fears and laws prompting those adoptions. Then, the indigenous tradition of oyster harvesting on the Cape connects new generations of Native Americans to their culture. But a new proposal for shellfishing licenses could impact business. We'll hear the pros and the cons ahead. Plus, I'll talk to two Massachusetts middle schoolers up for a National STEM Award for their climate change research. After the end of Roe v. Wade, the decades-old legal precedent that codified the right to abortion, many began to worry about what other rights the Supreme Court might do away with next. Top of mind for same-sex couples was the 2015 ruling that legalized marriage nationwide and afforded same-sex couples the rights and protections that come with marriage, including the right to make decisions for your children. To protect that right, many couples have resorted to legally adopting their own children, a path attorney Joyce Kaufman told GBH News she recommends to concerned parents.
We should not have to adopt our own children. I mean, it is insulting and ridiculous to have to do that. But my feeling is it's an insurance policy. It's like you want to protect your parentage, you do an adoption.
But the process can be costly and timely, especially for same-sex parents. GBH's Hannah Reale has covered this issue for GBH News, and she joins me now. Hi, Hannah.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, thank you so much for being here. Tell us why this is happening, why the overturning of Roe v. Wade set off alarm bells for these families, and why they're adopting their own kids.
So, I mean, fundamentally, any of these attorneys would tell you they have always recommended this. This is the, as many advocates like to call it, the belt and suspenders approach. You want to basically have everything shored up as much as possible when it comes to your own kids. Mm-hmm. You want to protect them. That's the idea. But with Roe v. Wade, the basic idea, there was some just fundamentally, I'm scared. If the court is overturning 50-year protections, what else can they overturn? But also, there was a specific line that Justice Clarence Thomas put in his concurring opinion to this ruling, where he pointed to same-sex marriage. And he said basically that there was flawed legal reasoning underpinning that decision too. So people feel as though we could be heading towards a system where some states recognize your marriage, other states don't. And that puts your parental rights in those states on shakier ground. That's just some uncertainty a lot of people aren't willing to live with.
So what are these parents concerned might happen regarding their parental rights?
There are some situations, traveling to other states, if you don't have your paternity or parental rights, whatever you might want to call it there, shored up completely, it's kind of fine until it's not fine is the mentality of these lawyers and advocates. So if you go on a vacation to Florida to go to Disney, it's okay unless you get in a car accident and the non-biological parent has to make medical decisions for your kid. And if they aren't legally recognized as the parent there, they wouldn't be able to do that. So there are these sort of disaster scenarios that they just really want to be prepared for. There have also been some high-profile court cases in other states that have to do more specifically with custody. So people being worried that the biological parent, in the cases of like sperm donors, egg donors, surrogates, would get preference over the non-biological parent. So wanting to get that all shored up so that there aren't any questions. There's no lack of clarity.
For sure. How much is this an issue in Massachusetts? Is it largely about traveling out of state, or are there concerns here?
It is for a lot of people top of mind when it comes to traveling out of state, seeing people in other states. But also if the biological parent passes away, you don't want there to be any ambiguity. There's not too much actual law on this matter. There's a lot of case law, but not too much actual law. Those laws haven't been updated since about the 80s. So there's a lot of questions about, how might things go in these disaster scenarios, as well as simple things like, getting your kid on your health insurance. If it is a situation where you're not technically recognized as the parent, there are a lot of bureaucratic processes that really rely on having these parental and marriage relationships totally unambiguous and clear.
So they're adopting their own kids, and that adoption process is not easy or inexpensive.
Yeah, no, not at all. It's about $2,000 a kid is like a rough estimate for these scenarios. And these are the most straightforward options you can get in a lot of cases. They waive the home study requirement on a lot of the time. There's a lot of things that you don't have to pay the thousands of dollars for that other parents who are adopting do have to pay. So that's kind of why you see that not every couple chooses to do this. Actually, most couples don't, because this belt and suspenders approach, it feels like, okay, I've already got the belt of, my name's on the birth certificate, what might be. The idea of paying $2,000 for the suspenders can, be really a high price for a lot of families.
Do we have any idea how many parents are actually doing this?
So every year, the data is so scant. I can tell you that the 10 attorneys I talked to said it's happening a lot more since last year. But also there were about 450 adoptions last year that are generally this category, but that would also include things like step parents adopting their kids.
Okay.
But those numbers are really tough.
In just the moment we have left, there is an effort underway to update laws in this state to define who a parent is, right?
Yeah, so there's something called the Massachusetts Parentage Act that attorneys and advocates have really been pushing for. They basically, like I said, these laws haven't been updated in decades. They want to just open up the options to parents to make these, give basically options like a voluntary acknowledgement of parentage to everyone, which is something you'd sign at the hospital. And it would hopefully, in their minds, have the same legal force as an adoption when you cross state lines. Just make it as simple as possible and try to clear that up. And just to be clear, this isn't just for same-sex couples. This is for heterosexual couples who use sperm donors, egg donors. This applies a lot more broadly than just unmarried or married same-sex couples. There's a lot here is kind of like a patchwork with our parentage laws, and people who do this day in, day out really want to get that sewn up.
So interesting. GBH's Hannah Reale, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Craig.
Next up, Paul Hendricks Sr. began harvesting oysters as a boy. It's a Mashpee Wampanoag tradition that continues on the waters off the Cape, where both his son and grandson make their living farming oysters. But as the climate changes, the challenges of oyster harvesting are changing too. The Hendricks family recently took me along for a day on the water to learn more.
One day I had one of these guys. The love for being out on the water is very close to my indigenous culture. That's the easiest way I can stay close to my grandfather, my ancestors, and what it really truly means to be a Wampanoag. Unfortunately, through ways of pollution and overfishing, now the wild fishery isn't what it used to be. So one way I can stay close to this culture is by doing the aquaculture farming. This pays my bills when nothing else does, I started my business with no money. I had no truck, I had a little sedan. I used to put the baskets in the back. My whole car just smelled like rotten seafood. But I would go out there in my waders and truck around in the mud and make a couple $100. Eventually, I bought a truck. And then eventually, I got a boat. I learned all my fishing techniques from my grandfather.
I grew up on Pompanesett Day. My father died when I was 10. My mother had 15 kids. Everybody had to work. I can't do it like I used to, of course, but that's the way it is. That's the way we were brought up.
Not the fastest ride, but it worked.
He's always lived off the land my whole life. Even when I was a small child going to my grandparents' house, I would come over, he would have raccoons, squirrels, possums, you name it, in the sink ready to eat for dinner. Obviously as a kid, he'd be like, "You want a squirrel for dinner?" I was like, "No, I'll take chicken nuggets." But now I appreciate that. In my mid-20s, we reunited and kind of became a fishing team, He's the reason I am Wampanoag. And big thing about tribal communities, we really like to take care of our elders. So I take so much pride in being able to give them the opportunity now to do something a little easier. Originally, I would help my dad, is how I started. He had his farm long before I had my farm. And now I make my own money and he makes his own money.
It's a good way to make a living. Now we're just another generation after generation after generation after generation living out here. So basically all our bills are paid off the ocean. And that's how they used to do it back in the day. So, I mean, it's nothing better than this.
My son started with me as soon as I could put him in the boat.
He just fell into this naturally. And of course, he brought his son to almost with that same weight. That's the way I brought him up. That's the way he brought his son up.
Historically, the water did not get that hot here. Now, it's getting very hot, so you'll see big die-offs of wild clams. So as a farmer, it definitely worries me, the climate change. The one benefit to the aquaculture farming, which to me ties in with being indigenous, is it actually helps restore the environment and clean the environment from the human pollution that we're putting in here. You know, my ancestors were out here over 3,000 years ago doing the same thing, harvesting shellfish, lobsters, tuna, you know, you name it, every fish, you know, this is our land. By being out here and being able to live off the land, not only I feel connected to the ancestors, but as a tribal person, this is life, this is fun, this is what I want to do, this is what I would do, maybe even not doing it commercially.
In Barnstable and Wellfleet, new shellfishing licenses can only be given to individual people who live in the town. And there are strict limits on how many acres a person can farm. Both towns recently saw proposals that would allow the names of companies on shellfish licenses rather than just people. The idea was shot down recently in Wellfleet, and in Barnstable, an advisory committee is set to vote on it tonight. Some in the industry say that change would just make doing business easier. Others see it as an existential threat to small farmers. Joining us now with different perspectives on this issue are Al Supernaut, founder and president of Cape Cod Oyster Company, one of the largest oyster growers in New England, and Brett Tolley, from the National Program Coordinator of the North American Marine Alliance. Thank you both for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Al, let's start with you. Your company manages oyster farms that are licensed to a number of individual people, but you manage them all sort of together, right? And you actually made the proposal in Barnstable for company names to be allowed on those licenses, right? Why is that a good idea?
Well, first of all the licenses, when I first started in the business, 1982, every license in the town of Barnstable was in a corporate name. So really what's happened is that the town, the two major companies in the town, Cotuit Oyster Company and Cape Cod Oyster Company, who Cotuit Oyster has been in business maybe 150 years, corporation business. Me, 40 years. Most of our acreage is in corporate name. So it's kind of like we're not sure. I'm not sure why the division of the DNR, which is the town shellfish bureau. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure why they want to change that.
Well, currently, though, new licenses can't go to company names, right? And your proposal would actually allow that to happen again, right?
Yeah. In other words, right now, you cannot, there's a little gray area because recently someone put a license in a LLC, which to me is the same as a company, mm-hmm. No different. But I'm not an attorney, so I can't really answer that question. But what we're trying to do is make it so that the family business, and there's quite a few of them in the town of Barnstable. The family businesses people are aging out. They're getting to be older, and they can't do the work, and they've got a kid involved that's coming up through the business. But unfortunately, you've got the grandparents on the leases, the mother and father on the leases, the grandkid owns the lease, and then so what happens when these people pass on?
And having it in the company name, you think would allow them, it'd be easier to pass on. And I know also, by the way, that you're proposing increasing the size limit for farms from currently it's 2 acres, 2 different parcels of 2 acres to 14. Yeah. Brett, I want to come to you. What is your feeling about the impact that those proposals could have on the local shell fishery?
Tax can be significant when we're talking about increasing the amount that any one corporation or individual can control. We've seen levels of consolidation in other fisheries around the state and around the country take on dramatic impacts when you allow the control to be removed from that community. There's dramatic economic impacts where we see money and jobs leaving the community. We see environmental impact where there's less accountability, and then the social impact, right? I agree with Al that thinking about the next generation of farmers is critical, right? And asking ourselves the question, how will these regulations or considerations impact the next generation? I also think that the core value that we've seen is this idea of tying fisheries access as close as possible to the community results in the best economic, social, and environmental outcomes for the public good.
Okay, Al, I've heard the concern, and Brett mentioned this, that increasing the size of the farms and putting it in a company name means that it won't be passed down to somebody else, so that a company could hold it in perpetuity. And I know there's a long list for people who are trying to get shellfish farms. How do you respond to the concerns about consolidation and how it might actually squeeze out smaller farmers?
Well, there's 2 companies in the town of Barnstable that have been around I've been around for 40 years, and Couture's been around for 150 years. And, we were in the business before there was a business. So there's more local people, there's more small farms in business today. And I think part of it is because of what we've done. In other words, we've made a successful business. And there are maybe 10 other farmers in the town right now that are in the same position that I'm in, where they have multiple family members that have acres, 2-acre parcels. So they have maybe 10 acres altogether. And so what happens when mom and dad pass away?
But they can still be passed down, right? Those licenses can be handed to the next generation, can't they?
No, because you have a limit of 2 acres.
Okay, because the children presumably
if you have 10 acres,
yeah,
and your parents pass away, now you don't have 10 acres anymore. You get 6.
Okay.
So it's really what you're doing is blowing up small family businesses, and all of these businesses are very, very small. My business is tiny. They're just not big businesses. They can't be.
Hey, Brett, I wanted to ask you about another reason for putting the company names on there that I've heard from some farmers that they feel like putting an LLC on there rather than their own personal name might provide them some more liability protection. How do you respond to that? That it might actually make it easier for the farmers not to get sued if, they're selling a raw seafood product. Do you think that there's anything to that?
Well, sure, I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense that I get small businesses, family-owned businesses outside of the fisheries or within the fisheries need that kind of protection. That makes sense. I think you can do both. I think you can have both a corporate LLC for those liability reasons while also having the name of an individual or town resident also attached to the permit name, where the long-term vision is to ensure that access remain in the hands of town residents. I think the risk of only going with an LLC name is that you go down the path of allowing outside companies to come in and control what is a town public resource. And I want to emphasize that public resource aspect. I understand, Al's point, folks worked really hard and built a local economy where there was none before, but this is not taking place on a private property, right? This is the ocean. This is our intertidal zones. This belongs to the people and the residents of Barnstable. And we need to make sure that the way this all moves forward is done transparently, openly, and determined by the people, not by the folks who are currently benefiting the most.
Okay, we'll see what happens in tonight's vote. Al Supernaut and Brett Tolley, thank you both so much for coming on to talk about this with us.
Thank you, Craig.
Finally tonight, 2 local scientists are up for a National STEM Award for their research into technology that could mitigate the effects of climate change. Those scientists also happen to be 12 and 14 years old. The award is through the Thermo Fisher Junior Inventors Challenge, which brings middle schoolers from across the country to show their research, collaboration, and critical thinking skills. Representing Massachusetts, 6th grader Johan Coisman from Weston tested artificial clouds that could cool down the Earth. And 7th grader Stephen Cronin from Norwood looked at making geoengineered curtain to slow glacial melting. They both join me now in the studio to talk about what they found. Thank you guys so much for coming in. Let's start with you, Johan. Tell me, what do we have here? What's your project, and what was the problem that you were working to solve?
So basically, the problem I was trying to solve is that global warming, it's an existential threat to life on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And this thing I have right here is the cloud chamber. At the top, there's a heat lamp that acts as a sun. And then in the middle, there's a ceramic non-heat conducting bowl with an atomizer in it that produces the cloud.
Okay, so this is a cloud chamber, and the goal is to create clouds that could actually cool the Earth?
Yeah.
Okay, and how does it work? What did you do to make it work and to test that it would work?
What I tested to see if it would work is I tested different types of clouds. So there would be like a 3-micron cloud, 7-micron cloud, 10-micron cloud, and different types of salinity.
And this is the size of the water particles in the cloud and the salinity of that water. And you could measure the difference in the cooling effect of the cloud?
Because there's a thermometer at the bottom, and we just saw whatever the temperature would be.
What did you find?
Well, the 3-micron and, in our case, which is the highest amount of salinity, the 15%, was the most reflective.
Amazing. All right. And Stephen, can you tell me about your research and what were you looking into? What was the problem that you were trying to solve?
All right. So for my research, I was looking at a geoengineered curtain. So in my research, I'd have the warm water. The geoengineered curtain would...
Is a curtain that would go around a glacier, right?
Yes.
And the problem is that the glaciers are melting, right?
Yes, the glaciers are melting, which would contribute to a lot of sea level rise. For example, the Thwaites Glacier contributes to 4% of sea level rise throughout the whole world, so that's a big deal about sea level rise.
Of course, and you wanted to see if we could actually geoengineer a giant curtain to go around a glacier that would prevent warm water from getting to the glacier.
Yes.
Okay, and how does it work?
So I'd anchor these 2 ropes to the sides of the aquarium, and then I have fishing weights at the bottom, so it wouldn't go like back and forth, it would just stay straight. And then I have these fishing bobbers, which would float so it wouldn't like sink or anything. And then inside my geoengineered curtain, I do have 2 tubes with sand and 1 tube with air. Those are all good thermal insulators, so that would protect the warm water from getting to the glacier. So.
Wow. Okay. And then you measured the temperature of the water on either side of the curtain, and did you find that it actually prevented warm water from getting to where the glacier would be?
Yes, it did, and my hypothesis was supported in my experiments, all of my tests.
This is a huge project. I mean, the glacier is enormous, right? It's the size of Florida, I think you said?
Yes.
Is it even possible to create a barrier like this that would prevent warm water from getting to the glacier?
Well, there are many challenges to do this. It's really cold in Antarctica. Also, it's really hard to, drive a ship to Antarctica, and then it would be hard to build. Yeah,
huge logistical problem. But possible. You're hopeful it could happen.
Yes, I believe.
And there's scientists who are actually working on making this happen.
Yes, like a lot of glaciologists from Princeton. Like, for example, in British Columbia.
Okay. And your project is also something that people really, scientists are currently working on, and the idea could actually happen, right? Okay. And, I mean, I wanted to ask you both, I mean, you could have focused on any topics, and you both chose climate change, and specifically these massive geoengineering projects to actually get around the problems. climate change is clearly going to be a huge challenge for especially for the youngest people, right? Are you finding that this is something that your generation, your classmates are really focused on? What drew you to this?
Basically, none of my classmates, they've heard of the idea of climate change, but they don't really know too much about it.
Yeah.
And the reason why I thought of this is that actually I was reading this book and it really scared me what they said could happen.
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the century, temperatures could rise by 3 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
It's just massive.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
Are you optimistic? Are you hopeful that projects like this could make a difference? And are you planning on being part of that solution?
Yeah.
Okay. How do you feel? Do you feel, Stephen, that optimistic about the ability of scientists to address this problem, or are we too far gone at this point?
I think we do have the ability to be optimistic about it. I'm optimistic about it because of how successful my science fair project was, and I know a bunch of researchers and glaciologists are thinking about doing my project too.
Yeah, okay. Do you think that the technological advances like what you're talking about is going to be enough, or do we need to do more to actually reduce, the impact we're having on the climate with carbon?
Well, so it's basically happening from the greenhouse gases. So if we could just limit that by by a few degrees Fahrenheit, then it would be a lot different for us, and that would be a lot better.
Yeah. Is this kind of project fun for you, or is this something that you do because it's something you take so seriously, or do you enjoy this?
I think it's kind of both.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about you? Is this a fun thing?
Yes, this is definitely a part of both, because I'm very interested in science and glaciers and climate change, and also it makes me feel nervous sometimes when I see the effects of climate change around low-lying areas like New York, Florida, and other low-lying countries.
Yeah, for sure. I think we should all be scared of what's happening right now, but I think we can all be really optimistic about the work that you guys are doing and that you're taking it so seriously, and hope that there's many more like you who are doing this kind of research. Good luck in the national competition. I hope that you both do really well in it, and thank you guys so much for coming on and talking to us about it.
Thank you.
It's really great. All right, that's Johan Coisman and Stephen Cronin. Thanks so much. One final note before we go. I went to the funeral today of GBH's beloved Brian O'Donovan, the longtime host of our Celtic Sojourn radio show. At least I tried to. In an unsurprising tribute, the church was at capacity, and a crowd of people stood outside streaming the service on their phones. So I stood with several GBH friends and colleagues, remembering one of the finest men and warmest souls we ever met. Tune in to GBH 89.7 this Saturday at 3 p.m. for a 3-hour tribute to Brian O'Donovan, who is considered a friend by so many. That's it for tonight. I'm Craig LeMoult. Good night.
Their forensic